There was a story in a newspaper in Boston, Massachusetts today, where they are in some spots they've got more than 70 inches of snow. Now it didn't all fall at once, but it did fall over a period of a couple of weeks, and they're really struggling to get this out of the way. They've brought in prisoners. In Massachusetts, making a prisoner work, I mean, that is really serious business. They brought in prisoners to help shovel out the area. But what they've done is they've mentioned that in the Northwest, the temperatures are seasonably, well, how shall we put this, warmer than usual. And there's some jealousy now from people in the People's Republic of Massachusetts about how those of us are living here in the great Northwest because we have so much sunshine lately and warmer than normal temperatures. It serves them right. As I said yesterday, all of the states that are currently buried under snow or frigid cold are run by Democrats. Now, there may not be a correlation there. I'm just bringing that up, that you can munch on that one for a while and consider the ramifications of it. These are the people who've been screaming the loudest that the world is coming to an end because we're all going to be fried to a crisp. Although sunspot activity, great story on sunspot activity I happened to see on the Drudge Report last night, points out that sunspot activity has actually been playing a big role in all of this. In fact, a friend of mine looked over the story for me. He's a climate scientist as well as runs a museum in Kentucky. And he replied telling me, yeah, he said, I've been studying this for years. And he pointed out, he said, the 11-year cycles work back and forth. So you get a 22-year cycle. And he said, if you go back to 1993, he said, you're seeing some almost identical weather. Wouldn't you know? Funny how that works. And it has nothing to do with smokestacks. Well, we're going to have to deal with it for a while because they've so far infiltrated the media that this dubious claim is going to continue probably well into our grandchildren's lives, and they'll be looking around scratching their heads saying, yeah, and when is it supposed to end? Soon. Trust me, soon. Speaking of coming to an end, a little later in the program, there is a great piece at The Atlantic written by a fellow who was talking about this thing called ISIS. And he says that for all of the political correctness being thrown forward by your government, that these people are about the most devious human beings you are ever going to encounter. And he said that the Western nations and the leadership in places like Washington and Paris and London just can't conceive that there are people who take their religious faith so seriously that they have reinstituted 7th century principles. In other words, they are medieval in their thinking. And from their own perspective, they believe what they are doing is right. They also believe that they are going to bring about the end of the world, and they see the apocalypse as being an important part of their faith. So the next time you hear someone say, well, we're not at war with... Give me a break. 9 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Also today, there is a story on the AP Wire, and it says that legislators have moved forward and they're going to try and figure out this situation with the broadband debacle in Idaho schools. Idaho budget writers have approved a nearly $3.6 million stopgap measure to maintain broadband access in public schools for at least another 4 months, acknowledging that questions are still swirling around the troubled program's long-term fate. Now, a judge the other day slapped this down, if you recall, and so now there's some scrambling going on simply because come Monday, some schools were going to be left without it. The money approved this week will not be used to pay Idaho's broadband vendors who have not been paid since the judge deemed the contract illegal. I guess that means it'll go to local providers who'll be paid by taxpayers of this state because of this. Now, the problem that I'm observing with all of this, and I've heard this from a couple of people the last few days, some of these contracts may have been let to political cronies, and that was the reason we ended up with so many problems in the first place. Now, if you just, it may have been far worse what was going on in neighboring Oregon, but the governor there had to resign last Friday because, again, he was ensuring that certain contracts, in his case for green energy, were being distributed to his girlfriend. Did you know that he had actually contacted governors in several other states asking them to take part in this scheme? So he could end up losing more than just the job. He's quit already. But he could be facing some serious charges if, well, strike that. He is a liberal Democrat, so it's likely that he's been paddled enough and he'll go away. But if the Justice Department was really serious, the federal Justice Department, about going after people like this who have been conning the taxpayers, then he could do some prison time if convicted. I don't know if it'll get that far. What it does tell us is that this whole green energy scam, that it is so vast and what they're doing. I had a candidate for Congress tell me a few years ago. He was a Republican running in an overwhelmingly a blue state. He did not succeed, but he made a good effort. And he was telling me one morning at breakfast, he was saying that you don't understand. He said, all of these programs for green energy, windmills, the solar panels, flatulence from cows or liberals who eat too much hummus. He said, all of this is really just a scam to take your money, your taxpayer money, give it to these people who promise this green energy but will never deliver. And then those people, they turn around and they ensure that they give a lot of campaign cash to the people who took the money from you. So all of those liberal politicians who are saying, I'm your friend, I'm for the little guy, Santa Claus is coming for a visit. Santa Claus is coming for a visit if you can give them a big wad of cash for their next political campaign. And then they'll reward you by taking money they'll rob from the poor, the taxpayers, and give to these well-heeled friends who are promising pie in the sky or giant pinwheels across the prairies. And the result being nothing happens, but it creates a pool of dollars to continually re-elect these far-left candidates who are making all of these ridiculous promises and telling you that the world is going to be coming to an end. It happens at the national level. The president a couple of years ago went to some electric car startup, which actually ended up failing, I believe, in Ohio. And the president of that company was there with him and talking about all of these great things we were going to do and how this was going to save the planet. The president never mentioned that his wife is the undersecretary of labor, and she got that job. The president of the company never mentioned this. She got that job. Do you know why she got that job? Well, because her husband had given a lot of money to the president's political campaigns, President Obama's political campaigns. So she got a reward out of the deal too. And the company went belly up, and they got to keep the money that they got from the taxpayers. We have a caller with us. It's 8:14. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yes, Bill, I try to pride myself in being informed and really trying to do so. And when they were, when they okayed and installed all the pinwheels, as you call them, it was amazing how little the general public in Idaho knew about this whole thing. Only after did we start seeing them did you start to see pushback. But you say the money that was spent just to install these, let alone to pay for them, is just astronomical. And, I can't remember exactly, I should know this, but we subsidize some massive amount to keep these things running, and they're not paying for themselves. And I guess in some cases they may wear out before they do pay for themselves. And it's amazing. But you see, this is what happens when the public is uninformed, and including me when we missed it, but I was only one person. You see,
I've seen
getting the people to wake up just seems to be like pulling teeth.
Absolutely. It's not always easy. Thanks for the call. I've seen legislators buy into this and then later on have to admit, we didn't know. Well, of course, you don't read the bill. There's the problem. What are you elected to do? And it's so overwhelming, though, for many of these legislatures around the country that they don't have time to sort through all of this, so they rely on the so-called experts. And the expert comes in and says, you got to do this. This will be good. It'll save we want to save the planet, too. I'll put that on my next mailing when I write all of my constituents and tell them how hard I'm working for them. I'm saving the planet for you because we're putting up these giant pinwheels. It's only going to cost you an arm and a leg, and they may never work, and speaking of them never working, a friend of mine, he had worked in the oil industry, knows a little bit about energy. He was at a wedding reception, and it was in a coastal area where they had a lot of these things that were set up, and some are on land, some are planned for out in the water. But he was watching, it was a wind-free day, which was rare in this area of the coast. But he was watching this thing, which was maybe 2 blocks from where the reception was taking place, and it was spinning madly. So he got curious, and he did a little investigation. He later found out, speaking of pulling teeth, he had to pull a lot of teeth to get to this. But he later discovered that this thing actually has a little electric motor inside it. And that when the wind isn't blowing, what they do is they flip that motor on, and that mower then makes that turbine spin round and round and round to give the impression that it is working and generating electricity. But instead, in fact, it is pulling electricity from the electrical grid, which came from many other sources, but not wind. And some of those many other sources, you know that in this country for our electricity generation, we're still, I think, burning, for 50% of the electricity we use, we're burning oil. And then we're also burning some coal still, maybe not as much because, of course, the president has tried to put the coal industry out of business, promising you that the pinwheels are going to be the salvation for all of us. But yes, in order to con you, they are putting little engines into these things so they can spin around, round, 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 round. And you go, wow, man, that thing must really be kicking up the megawatts today. But instead, it's just sucking more juice up from another source. Don't we get it? When are we going to finally say enough and stop? Well, the problem is, even I think the best-hearted people who get elected to various offices, and the higher they climb, whether it be to state office and then on to perhaps a federal office, are often, not all, but are often co-opted by this because they need, we talked about this one day last week, they need the campaign cash. In this day and age, there's a great story today at Daily Caller. And a conservative son of the late Robert Mitchum is running for political office and has discovered that the enemy, the political enemy, has been actually making up quotes about him. But they have so much money for advertising that they have been able to, or they were at least in a recent campaign, they were able to go plaster the district in radio, TV, print, and media and create this impression that this guy was a kook. He's suing them now because, as it turns out, everything they did was clearly below the belt, and he did not say the things that they maintained he did. But they had so much money they could do it, and in the short term, it helped them with whatever. And the ends justify the means for Lefty. Lefty doesn't have a Judeo-Christian formation to worry about. Lefty isn't concerned about burning in hell forever. Lefty just thinks, hey, we'll do this because we're protecting sweet Mother Earth. And we're protecting our political beliefs. Workers of the world unite. And it doesn't matter how many of you get trampled in between. I have a guest coming up in a few minutes. On a lighter note, we're going to be talking about how you might train for a new job. It'd be part-time work, but sometimes a little part-time work on the side will help pay some bills. And we're going to talk about what type of person might benefit from this. It pays $10.75 an hour. And they'll be joining us talking. In fact, if you already have a CDL license, this may be right up your alley. More details on that coming up in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, where you can hear us anywhere, all over the world. I have a guest joining us in the studio for a few minutes this morning, and I'm doing a little work on my microphone over here. Susan, give me a test if you can.
This is Susan Hendrickson.
Oh, my gosh, it works. That's a good sign. See, I'm getting used to this studio. I've been here, 6 or 7 weeks? But when Kelly was here, of course, now Kelly being an engineer, engineers don't think like the rest of us. So some of the microphone levels over here he set, but you have to figure out which microphone it is. And I tend to look at it and think in a linear fashion. Kelly was thinking in another plane of existence because the buttons don't necessarily, when you look at the microphones, match which one it happens to be. But you're joining us this morning because the last couple of weeks I've been telling people a great deal about a service that your company provides. And I've been telling people, too, it's a great way to pick up some extra income for a family. And we had a woman in here, in fact, from CSI a couple of weeks ago. She works at CSI, but she grew up on a farm, knows how to operate heavy equipment. And she said, so she's got a desire to become a school bus driver. And I said, isn't that funny? Because I know where you could go. And we talked a little bit about that. 8:25 right now. And I should point out, it's still a little chilly outside, 28. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And Bill Colley and Susan Hendrickson with you. And, of course, we've been telling people a great deal. This is my heavily marked commercial, as you can see. All of my notes from it, but about Western states. And the efforts you've been making, training people to become school bus drivers.
Correct.
Which is, judging by what I see on the roads, is a big business.
Yes, it is. We transport for Twin Falls School District, and it's an increasingly growing area. So we're always watching. you know, if we got overcrowded buses, those kind of things. So we're always looking. And we're really looking for drivers right now.
And that's because, we had the school superintendent and some folks were here last week. The massive growth in just Twin Falls in the school district. And really, Jerome's not a tiny town any longer, and some of our other surrounding neighbors.
They're starting to blend together.
Yeah, it's going to look like one big sprawl out there sooner or later.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that creates more schools, that creates more routes. And so there's a need for people to drive school bus.
There is.
What do they need to know? I mean, first of all, if they wanted to contact you, we should maybe start there. How do they go about doing that?
Well, the first thing is give us a call. Call us on the phone. We talk to them, see what their interests are. They ask a lot of questions. We respond to those, and then we have them come in to the office and fill out an application. In many cases, we'll interview right then, right after the application is given to us.
Nice and quick. Now, it's not for everyone. You were telling me that during the commercial break.
Correct.
Certainly, some people have time restraints and the like. You've got to have a somewhat flexible schedule.
Right. It's a split shift schedule, if you can think about what time the kids have to get on the bus. So it could start as early as 6 o'clock, 6:15. Then as soon as they get to school, it's over about 9 o'clock. And then they're again in the afternoon. They start again about 2:15. They're done about 4:30, 4:45. So it's a split shift.
You could have, and I remember we were talking in the break that when I was a kid, a lot of the women who worked on farms, the husband would finish the chores, they would go out and drive the bus. They could come back home and help him out for a few hours, then they'd go back out again. And it was ideal because in a farm family, sometimes people seem to think that farming might make people wealthy. As a buddy of mine says, he said, when I sell the cows, he said, I'll be wealthy then. But until,
Exactly.
he said, while I'm doing it, there's no money in it. But a number of people like that do have that flex time in the middle of the day.
Right. It's a perfect job as a supplemental income because it's part-time work. So if you're a retiree and you're wanting to plan that great vacation, that's an excellent way to earn this extra money and just pocket it. But at $10.75 an hour, it's not bad. We train at a different wage. We train about $8.15 an hour, $8.30 an hour, and yet we cover all the expenses to become a school bus driver because it takes a CDL.
Right.
So we help people get through that process and get their tests passed, and then we pay them to come in and train with us, and we provide all that training. We get them ready to take their behind-the-wheel CDL test, and we actually take them for that test also. We cover that expense. We cover their physical costs. They go to where we get their physicals for them. We cover their pre-employment drug tests. So there's just a little bit of self-motivation to come in and do it right away. And if they incur any costs, we will reimburse those costs to them also.
I learned to drive in my dad's Buick Electra, which was about 22 feet long, and I had to take my driving test on it and parallel park and do all of those things. Now, that's larger than most vehicles I've been driving throughout my whole life. A bus itself would dwarf that little car. It would seem little next to it. So there's some challenges, too, though. You've got to learn to handle a piece of machinery that is especially long but tall, and you do get a great field of vision, I'm sure, but still there are some issues with that. You've got to be calm enough to be able to maneuver that thing, I guess is the way I'm putting it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of training. We actually, because they're so large, we train on reference points. When you're looking in any of the 7 mirrors, because the driver has 7 mirrors, to look all around them, try to avoid those blind spots so that we do everything we can. And the state of Idaho has specifics that every school bus must have, including how many mirrors are on a bus and what they cover. So we try to get rid of all those blind spots for them, and we train them in the buses. So by the time they're ready to take their test and get out on the road with kids, they're ready, they're confident, and we don't want them out there unless they are.
We're going to continue this in just a couple of minutes. We have a short break coming up at 8:30. It's 28 right now. Susan Hendrickson from Western States Bus Services in studio with us this morning. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Our guest in the studio right now, Susan Hendrickson, joining us from Western States Bus Services. And we're talking about how you, and believe me, the economy over the last 7 or 8 years has been a little rough for some people. And sometimes if you'd like to rebuild even that portfolio for retirement and all, a good part-time job is the way to do it. A couple of years part-time work. might just reestablish you in that situation. On the other hand, since it's a job that would give you some time off in the summer, as well as a little time off during some of the school breaks during the course of the school year, you also have time to do a little relaxation. So it's not going to eat up all of your time in that situation. And Susan's giving me a thumbs up over here. That's an important part of this, isn't it?
It is. It really is. Even this last weekend, all of our drivers and attendants had 4 days off. Wonderful. They
For the
loved it.
holiday.
For the holiday,
Yeah.
yes. We didn't have school in Twin on Friday, and there was no school on Monday, so they had 4 days. So if you think about when the kids are in school and when they're not, that not time is your vacation time, your downtime. And in the last few weeks, we've gotten wonderful applicants from individuals. Yesterday specifically, Julie, if you're listening from Filer, you came in because you saw our ad on the CSI website. And with that ad, she says, I'm tired of staying home. I want something to do, just a little something. And that was great because that's who we're looking for. Those people that want this split shift job.
Plus, when she gets to December, she's got a lot of Christmas money next year.
Yes, she's got a lot of Christmas money. And she's excited. She says, I'll have these tests passed by Friday.
Now, it is important that anyone who has an interest in this has a clean driving record, and
Absolutely.
really a clean record overall, because you have to have a background check working with children.
Correct. And I'm the one that performs those background checks, and they take up to 3 to 5 days at times. And they also have to have a clean driving record. So when we interview, we ask those kind of questions, and we tell them what the requirements are. And right away, they can tell whether that's going to match what they provide or whether it's not the job for them, because it's not for everybody. But I tell you, yesterday we had a driver's meeting, and I spoke to all the drivers and told them that I was going to be on the air. And I said, the one thing I would say about you is you are great. You make a difference for kids. And you get really nervous at the thought that someone else is going to drive those kids because you're safe with them. You're on time. You provide that service that's very important to them, to getting to school and getting home. And you're the same person every day. And that's the kind of person we're looking for.
Yeah, when I was a kid in school, and we had a bus driver for a number of years named Mrs. Weller, and she and her husband owned a hotel in town, so he could work there while she drove the bus a few hours a day. Mm-hmm. I went to school with her son. He was in my grade, so I knew the family pretty well. But she was almost like a second mother to everybody after a while on that bus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so many of the drivers say they're in the store and kids will run up to them and say, Mom, I want you to meet my bus driver. This is her, this is her, this is him, this is him. And there's really a strong connection.
How long is the course?
The course to become a school bus driver? Well, it begins with passing the test with the DMV. There's 4 tests that have to be passed. And we have a lot of study guides to help with that process. And we have videos. And once that's accomplished and they get their commercial driver's license permit, we begin the training process. It'll go as fast as the learner. We don't want to go so fast that it's too fast for them. So it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks. It's what's necessary for confidence. And that's what we want.
And then you get out on that course and you start working on the course. And mm-hmm. I've seen some television shows where you're working with pylons and the like. Does it actually look like that?
Yeah. We'll set them up at different places. We want to teach the reference points. When you see the pylons, you're seeing the reference point instruction. So when they see a pylon, where's the turning point of the bus in different mirrors? And so we're trying to demonstrate there are blind spots and how to overcome those blind spots.
Bus drivers get so familiar with kids because I was mentioning how we thought of her as a second mother. Sometimes we would be engrossed watching Underdog on TV as the bus would come to pick us up. And she would hit the horn outside, and that meant, hey, it's time to move. Because I did miss the bus one time that way, which did not make my dad really happy. But I think he spoke to her. And after that, beep, beep, you'd hear that. You knew it was time to get moving and get along because, of course, she had a schedule to keep. For the people who are again, we've got about a minute to go, but again, if someone really has an interest in this, and some people listening today, as I say, maybe taking some notes and all of that, again, how do they go about getting in touch with you and really coming in for that interview? Well,
you'd call the location. The location number is 733-8003. It's a Filer address. It's on Highway 30, just before Curry Crossing. Before you get to Filer, on the right-hand side, you can't miss lots of buses.
Yeah. Sea of yellow.
Sea of yellow. The billboards. The yellow billboards. Yes.
And how many people do you take through a course at a time?
Just one.
Okay.
One-on-one. We
No
have
distractions then.
Correct. One-on-one. We have 3 certified trainers. They provide the training. They're very, very good. 2 women, 1 man. And they really get to know each individual every applicant that they're training at that time.
And again, you've got time in the middle of the day if you just want to go out and have a cup of coffee, meet friends and everything else, and get back to the bus in the afternoon and start all over again. Just do it in reverse, of course.
Yeah, get your washing done, get the windows washed, or just enjoy watching TV in the middle of the day.
I don't know that I could do that. Trying to do my job in reverse it takes a special kind of person.
Yes, it does.
Well, Susan Hendrickson from Western States Bus Services, we'd like to say thank you for coming by today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and come see us.
Oh, you know what? I got to get down that way anyway because I have not yet hit every diner in the area, and I'm on a search. It's been my mission throughout life.
Thank you for having me.
That's got to be my next job. I'm going to be not just a restaurant critic, but a diner critic. We've got more coming up. 29 at our studios. It's 8:40 on News Radio 1310 KLIX. I'm looking at video during the break. If you go to our Facebook page, News Radio 1310 KLIX Facebook page, one way to do that is if you just do the search on Facebook, you do KLIX, it should. It does it for me. I would assume yours is similar. It pops right up. And I posted a video there today, which one of my former bosses, actually he's an alum from Town Square Media himself, having worked for our stations in Texarkana. That sits on the border of Arkansas and Texas. Figure that one out. He sent me a video, and it's a discussion. It's well done, and it looks real. I mean, sometimes you'll see these videos put together, and there's some continuity problems. But it's a video with President Obama, and he's talking to Jack Webb and Harry Morgan from Dragnet fame. And it is priceless to listen to the thing. And then they've actually edited in the president's reactions as Jack Webb goes on and on about liberty, personal liberty, and the like. So you can check that out if you look at our Facebook page at KLIX. Bill Colley with you this morning. It's 8:45. 29 at our studios. Yes, it's going to cool off a bit in the next few days. Not all at once, but we may even have some snow, a little bit of snow in the forecast. But I don't expect that that's going to be burying us. Just to keep in mind, it is still February, and we have been a little spoiled with the weather. I want to thank our previous guest, Susan Hendrickson, for joining us on the air. And just to remind you, Western States Bus Services is hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. As she pointed out, drivers just had a 4-day weekend. Pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. That's 8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. I saw a poll this morning as I was coming up into work. Well, okay, I was here at work because I'm not supposed to be looking at these things while I'm driving. Not that I ever would. I try to follow the laws of the land. I'm a cruise control guy. I get on the highway. I don't speed. If I took the cruise off, I might. But I keep myself just under the speed limit in cruise control because, as my dad told me when I was young, it says limit. That means you don't exceed that. You can drive under it. You don't exceed that. And, of course, it happens to be one of the most – I'm losing my clipboard here, too, as well. But it happens to be one of the most ignored laws, along with that hands-free business in some states about cell phones. Come on. I see people yakking on those no matter where I go around the country. So I saw a poll when I got to work this morning, and this appeared at the Daily Caller. Georgia poll shows huge opposition to Obama's amnesty. Now, you know what's going to happen here? You're going to hear the lefties going to come out and denounce this and say, well, that's Georgia, ha, 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 ha. Part of the old Confederacy, ha, 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 ha. As if somehow they're still riding around in their gray uniforms down there and yelling out for their dogs, Belvedere, oh, Belvedere. It's not quite like that in Georgia. You go to Atlanta, it might be the most cosmopolitan city in the Western world. And I have a friend who lives in Macon, and while, yes, he is a conservative, he actually is a transplant from Sydney, New York. So it's not quite the Georgia that lefty likes to make it out to be. And Gone with the Wind is fiction, and it is set a couple of centuries ago. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. 90% of Republicans and 70% of Democrats said that Americans, quote, should get the future jobs in Georgia, unquote, prior to the hiring of foreign workers. Those answers contradict the conventional media portrayal of GOP voters as anti-worker and highlight the growing GOP focus on the lower-income workers who strongly oppose wage-cutting immigration. That populist trend helped businessman David Perdue win his Senate seat in 2014, despite his conflict with the state's Chamber of Commerce. You may also remember he defeated the daughter of Sam Nunn, who was a Democrat but a Georgia family legend, and he defeated her too as well because he simply stuck to his guns when it came to some of these issues. Maybe there is a lesson for some of those who waver in the Republican Party. Here are some poll numbers. Don't be worried about what they think about what you do over at MSDNC or CBS or ABC. Well, we don't want to mention NBC. They've been thoroughly discredited. Don't be worried about that. Don't be worried about newspaper editorials. Follow the gut that says the public, well, you don't even have to do that. Follow the facts. The public doesn't want amnesty for illegal aliens. And just, you don't have to go very far. Walk into any diner and you can sit around and listen to some of the conversation. You can hear water cooler conversation at work, conversation you have with your neighbors. And frankly, the majority of Americans, I still think, are what we would call working class people. They don't want this. And we do most of the dying and the living in this country and pay most of the taxes too. I think someone should really start listening to us. The writer goes on to say, the poll also showed lopsided support for a pending state bill that prevent illegals in Georgia from getting driver's licenses. Now, you did know that this court case that came down in Texas the other day from the federal judge, and it's not striking down the amnesty. He's just saying, hey, we've got to have some decisions made before we go on with this. And there's a lot of legal questions that have to be answered. Idaho was one of the states that was a party in that lawsuit. And so the fact that our own AG got involved had some impact on all of that. Now, one state could have done it. I mean, the way the judge ruled, he ruled on some very valid legal principles. So just one state could have made the argument, but you had multiple states that were involved in that. And people are just dang sick of this. Going all the way back to 2007, I had just started working at a radio station hosting an afternoon talk show at the time. And I have a friend named Phil Kent. Speaking of Georgia, Phil lives in Georgia, but Phil has written some books about illegal immigration. Frequent guest, in fact. If you watch Lou Dobbs on TV, Phil is one of his frequent guests. And I know Phil through some mutual friends. And Phil was telling me when I went back to work in talk radio, he said, you are going to find that this is the number one issue among your callers. And then it waned somewhat because we had the big recession that followed that period. And with that recession, the issue sort of became media said it was a back burner issue. And over the years, every time I hear immigration reform, you want to talk about an Orwellian use of language. Reform. What does that actually mean? You'll see these guys on Meet the Press or Face the Nation. Oh, well, we need immigration reform. First of all, they're not all talking about the same thing, right? What does that mean? Well, no one's defining it for us. But for Lefty, it means amnesty. Lefty, it means getting rid of that border. For Lefty, it means playing Santa Claus to all of these people. And they want to play Santa Claus to all of these people because then all of these people will continue to vote for Lefty. And they don't care what it's going to cost everybody in this country. You can reach our program by calling us at 736-0300. That's the whole Alinsky Clow and Pivot strategy, is to go out and just crash the system so then they can go back and start putting together their socialist paradise. You're up next, and you're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and Top Story. Good morning.
Good morning. I blame political correctness for most of this. I mean, I heard on the news this morning they're talking about this whole immigration thing that Obama got stopped on, and they're calling it undocumented workers. Undocumented is a nice way of icing a cake of saying illegal. So if I go down the road and I'm speeding, am I an undocumented speeder?
And if you go into a bank and rob it, you're not making an undocumented
robber.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny how they like the laws and flaunt laws that they want, but they sugarcoat and change the name of the laws. They don't.
And again, it's an Orwellian use of language. I thank you for the call. I'll get to my next caller. Hold on in just a minute. Some years ago, I think just about 2013, in fact, so it wasn't that long ago, the AP had always said in its style book it was illegal alien. But there was a revolt among America's leftist newspaper editors who wanted it to be called undocumented. Want to shift that language for those Orwellian purposes. AP eventually backed down and went with undocumented. It just shows you they're not interested in just giving you the facts any longer. They are trying to, well, they're doing social engineering. You're up next. It's 8:53, 29 degrees on Top Story. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Hey, Bill. Good morning. I just wanted to tell you, you're on a roll, man. I tell you, we need you. We've needed you for the last 20 years, man.
Checks in the
I'm
mail.
not kidding you, man. You're on top of it, and it's such a breath of fresh air to have people expose these people for what they are, and it's time we take our country back. And I don't mean in a violent way or anything. I just mean in a way that we get our country back to its roots. You know, it's crazy.
Well, I don't know that we'd ever have to do it in a violent way because Lefty, first of all, doesn't want to handle firearms. And Lefty would likely just raise the white flag if we showed enough of a united front against him.
Well, that's absolutely true, and that's why the way I feel that we can take it back in a nonviolent way. But I think it's really time with all this stuff this president is running down the pipe. This internet thing, I don't think people are really understanding what this man's going to do with this and how much of a freedom grab this is.
Do you realize that this grab for the internet, which is I think a week away, it's coming up on the 26th, the vote at the FCC, that Saudi Arabia, Russia, and China all believe it's the right way to go?
Oh, of course, yeah. All right, Bill. Well, thanks, and keep up the good work.
Hey, thank you much for the call, sir. It's 8:55 now. You're listening to Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I've made this point before, a guy standing on a street corner dealing crack cocaine is not an undocumented pharmacist. A guy who goes into the bank and sticks a note to the teller while he's holding a gun and says, "Give me all the money," he's not making an undocumented withdrawal. They have gone out and they have suddenly, it's not just the word undocumented for illegal. Take a look at the New York Times. Maureen Dowd, who's a columnist there about, I think she's a 70-year-old virgin. Well, maybe not, but she's a columnist there. She wrote about a year ago, and now the paper there is following her lead, that the paper should no longer use the word homosexual, that gay would be better. Well, there was a time when gay meant happy, and that was all it meant. Happily excited. And I always thought that was a strange word to apply to people who had same-sex attraction in the first place. But apparently her argument is homosexual is a bad word now. I don't know. You call me heterosexual, you don't see me complaining about it. So here you go again. They are trying to rework the language so they can rework the country and they can create a new country. This political correctness, that piece I mentioned earlier in The Atlantic, I want to talk about this perhaps if we get a chance in the next hour of the program. There's a piece in The Atlantic, great magazine. I used to be a subscriber back when I used to get print magazines in the mail. And they went from 12 months to 10 months, and eventually it's now just pretty much an online affair. But online affair might be a wrong choice of words. That's for those dating sites, isn't it? It's an online publication. But there is a story in that publication, and I've also posted that a number of places too on Facebook. I believe I posted that at our website, not website, but our Facebook page, KLIX Facebook page. And it describes how the political correctness in Western capitals is one of the worst things we're facing when it comes to fighting. And right now, the greatest threat to humanity is this group known as ISIS. And yet you have people who are trying to downplay this and trying to brush it aside. Let me tell you, when even Chris Matthews starts saying, you know what, I think we got a problem here. You know what, someone over at the White House should start paying attention to as well. But there you go again. They keep coming out and saying, well, this isn't really Islam. The writer at The Atlantic, who is neither conservative nor liberal by the looks of things, at least from his writing style, the writer is making a point that I think we cannot forget, and I think what he is saying is it is Islam. It's a very fundamentalist, original, traditional Islam that is being practiced by these people. So when you say, oh, it's the religion of peace, he said, no. You go back to its founding. He said, in the founding, they talked about crucifying enemies, burning enemies. They apostates, if you will. These are things that they are doing, and they firmly believe they are doing the right thing when they lop off a guy's head. And we've got people who keep trying to sugarcoat it because, well, we don't want to offend anybody here or anybody else. I'm sorry. You don't win wars that way. And this is one the Western world has to win because it is just gruesome. And these people, as I said earlier in the program, they are gearing up for the end, the final battle, the apocalypse. And they welcome it. They welcome it. You know how you cure that? You go cut them off at the knees and give it to them, but you spare everyone else. News is coming up next at 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Plenty more on that subject ahead in the next hour. As I was mentioning a bit earlier, if you go to our Facebook page, I have a few things I posted there this morning, and I want if you get a chance, I'm not going to demand that you do it. No one can force you to do that. That's a leftist viewpoint. You will go look at it, and you will read it, and you will accept this health care from President Obama, and you will accept the control of the internet, and you will only eat meat once a week, because otherwise we will have too much bovine flatulence causing global warming. You will follow your instructions. You will not drive your car. You will ride a bicycle or take the tram, and you will move to Portland, Oregon, and live in a big cinder block high-rise. Now, we're not going to be doing that here on this program. 7 minutes after 9 o'clock, 30 is our temperature. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, you can reach our program today by giving me a call. Computer's doing one of these things over here, blinking at me rapidly. See, that's the White House's response to what I just said. They flash these lights against your retina, and then, of course, you start walking around like an automaton. I must vote for the president a third time. I must vote for the president a third time. We must change the Constitution. So I posted some stories. If you go to KLIX Facebook page, and the one I was referencing just before the end of the break is something that I have posted there as well. But it is a terrible, terrible story, and it's really detailing what we're up against in that part of the world. And you may have read, if you're fans of the Drudge Report, you may have read that the president is looking to bring a number of refugees from Syria to this country. See, he got cut off at his attempts to grant amnesty to one group. So now he wants to bring people here en masse from Syria as refugees, many of whom could come masquerading as refugees but be members of ISIS. And I would bet that they already have people they've recruited in this country. They may not have quite the numbers that they want yet, but I think we're going to start seeing the efforts made here, as in we saw in Canada already. You saw that fellow beheaded, or that woman beheaded in Nebraska in her workplace last year. It's not just workplace violence, folks. It's far more serious. But this is titled What ISIS Really Wants. And if you go to our Facebook page and look at it, it says What ISIS Really Wants. And it's illustrated with a large red photograph, and then in the middle there's an orange circle. It's long, but I'll tell you what, share this with people at your churches, share this with people in your service clubs, share this with your neighbors, your friends, maybe even your enemies, because they've got to know this thing it's reached critical mass. And if we don't do something shortly about it, there's all this talk that the Prime Minister of Israel is coming to speak in a couple of weeks to Congress. Oh, well, it will irreparably harm relations between Israel and the United States because he was not invited by our Lord and Messiah, Barack Obama. What are they trying to do? Is there something biblical in that? The abandonment of Israel as well? Are we not perhaps seeing the end times suddenly playing out here? Think about that for a moment. I can't imagine that the USA would ever back away from Israel when just a few miles away this threat. I mean, this is as close. You think about where Israel is on the map. You think about where ISIS is doing business. Speaking, I mentioned Portland, Oregon a few minutes ago. ISIS is closer to Israel than Portland is to us. And there's no mountain range that really has to be scaled at any point. No huge thick forests, anything like that. Hezbollah has so many weapons. It's believed they have 30,000 rockets. If they were to join in, they could just pretty much take Israel off the map now. And all we're doing is saying, well, he shouldn't come here and talk because that would be mean to President Obama. Well, President Obama is the fellow who toppled Muammar Gaddafi, who had been over the last 10 years of his life an ally of the United States. He turned. He had once been a sworn enemy, but he had turned to become an ally of the United States. President Obama even admits that his war against Libya was an illegal war. He toppled Mr. Gaddafi, and the result has been Coptic Christians are being beheaded on the beaches in that country. This guy is a train wreck, and it's allowed to go on, and he's been given a pass by establishment media, mostly. Chris Matthews, speaking out a couple of days ago, never mentioned the president when he said, we've got to really do something about this threat halfway around the world. Do you want your boys to go off and fight these people? Well, maybe not. But unlike the wars of the last 10 years, which I believe, of course, were justified, but I don't think anyone could doubt what's going on in this situation. Some of the other things I posted at KLIX Facebook today. There's also another story there that talks about how ISIS is treating women, and it believes in enslaving women and children. That is also Quranic. That comes from their holy book. Well, their book. They believe in doing those things. They're not shy about it. But the women who they've basically kidnapped and made their wives, it talks a little bit about how they are being treated, and it's not a pretty sight. Call it rape and call it violent, serious, abusive, painful rape, if you will. But that's what's going on. So I've posted some of those details about that there at KLIX this morning. So take a look at that if you get a chance. The one thing that gets me about all of this, and I know we've got people, especially in because we have a large LDS community, who've done mission work all over the world. This has been going on in Africa, think Darfur, for 20 years. This has been going on in some parts of Indonesia and Malaysia. This has been going on in, as Mr. Obama calls it, Pakistan. This has been going on long before we ever got into a war in Afghanistan. It was going on there. This has been going on in Egypt, Iraq. It has been going on in what was once Lebanon, which was once one of the most beautiful countries of the world. The persecution of Christians has been going on now, and it's been ramped up by these people in the Islamic world over the last 2 to 3 decades, and it has been virtually ignored. I mean, how many times have you heard the name Darfur on your newscasts? If you're watching the old alphabet networks, never. Sometimes on Fox. Even Fox lost interest. How about those kidnapped schoolgirls? Kidnapped in Nigeria. How long have you heard about, when was the last time you heard any real serious stories about them? Remember, for 2 weeks, it was all over the news. Women were standing up on the Senate floor saying, we must do something about it. People like Barbara Mikulski, she can barely see over the podium. And we must do something about it. And that's why she needs a driver. I know these things because I know someone that used to be her driver. She can't see over the dashboard, but we need to stop this right now. And then people would say, well, are you willing to commit troops? No. Then how are we going to stop it? Well, the president's going to send them a strongly worded message, and then we're going to send them a picture of myself and Hillary Clinton together and frighten them to no end. Well, nothing's changed there. The kidnappings go on. The girls are being told you are now Muslims, you are no longer Christians. You may be 8 years old, but you are now the wife of the local thug. And the local thug is going to use you and abuse you in whatever way he wants. So here you go again. And folks, I know I'm doing a local talk show in one small corner of the world, but we need a call to arms. And I've brought this up before. We keep hearing that most of the people in this country of that particular faith are peaceful people and nice people. I'm not going to deny that. However, as this thing grows, there are going to be elements, even in those peaceful communities, some disaffected young people who are going to rise up and think that they have to take the war to our own streets. And you know how you're going to stop it? You've got to you can't manage these people. You've simply got to wipe out the threat of ISIS, and you've got to eliminate it once and for all and for good. And if that means you've got to chase every last one of them across the desert and hit them with a 50 caliber from the chopper above, and if it's the last one on the planet, you do it. Because if they're looking for the apocalypse, you've got to understand we've got to give it to them. But we don't want it, so we'll give them what they want, and we'll ensure that we survive. It's 9:15. Bill Colley with you this morning. All right, I'll get down off the stump for a minute. If you've got a question or comment this morning, feel free to give me a call at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. My telephone number is 736-0300. That is 736-0300. You can also email me, and emailing me, some people find that to be easier. Some people are shy about either talking on the air or they don't want their neighbors to hear them talking. You called a talk radio program, especially if your neighbors are liberals. Well, I thought you were like everybody else, listening to public radio all day. Liberals all think you do that. There's a story in the Idaho Statesman today, rambling on about some public radio issue. And you look at that and you say to yourself, these newspaper editors actually think that everybody else is listening to those shows too. Nah. I think they're referencing the talk show host on public radio, Diane Rain. They all know who she is. Everyone else looking at the paper is like, who the hell is that? It's 9:16 now. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and Top Story with Bill Colley. What's on your mind?
Hi, good morning, Mr. Colley. My name is Mike, and I'm a retired Army veteran. And there's one thing about your call to arms. Well, two things actually need to occur along with that, in my opinion. And that would be getting rid of the politicized military leadership that we have right now, and also injecting some intestinal fortitude in our civilian leadership. We have not propagated a war, quote unquote, since the 1950s. A great explanation of war was given to me by a commander I once had. He said, war is to go kill people and break things and to make the other guy blink first.
I have a friend, he was in the Navy back in the 1980s, and he's now working in Seattle. He said the same thing. It's about smashing things. It's not about building schools.
Exactly. Hey, that can come after, much like the Reconstruction did in Germany, much like the Reconstruction did in Japan after World War II. But those are the key critical points there that came after the war was over, after the enemy said, I quit. I surrender, I quit. We haven't had that since then, primarily because we will not go to that degree. And some people argue with me and say, well, we're not that type of people. We're not barbarians. I'm sorry, but if you look at the nature of war is at its very nature barbaric and horrific, and that's the reason why we only fought them every once in a while instead of these decade-long actions that we're doing now.
Well, when you say that people will say to you, we're not like that, ask them who they mean by we.
Yeah.
They don't mean me. I'm always stunned by that. The thing is, you've got so many people in Washington, and many Republicans too, who believe that the military is just an extension of the Peace Corps. It's the Peace Corps with some rifles. And
yes.
They tend to look at it that way. I give credit. When Senator Crapo was here a couple of days ago, he said, if you go at this, you've got to do it and got to realize there's going to be collateral damage. I just finished a book called Armageddon by Max Hastings about the last year of the Third Reich, what it was like inside Germany as it collapsed. And before that, I had been reading An Army at Dawn. And you know what? The Allied armies didn't go in there and say, well, we've got to avoid this milk plant. We've got to avoid this over. No, they went in and they just said, we got to get this done. And they cleared the land.
One of the best examples is the city of Dresden.
Yeah.
They reduced Dresden to ash. And Dresden was not a military target per se. It had military implications with some of the manufacturing industry there. But that key event right there really took it to the German people and made
Wake
them
up
think
call.
twice.
Yeah. Hey, thank you much for the call. I've got to run. We have a hard break coming up. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. 32 right now at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 23 minutes after 9 o'clock. And just a quick note, we had a guest in the studio with us in the last hour talking about Western States Bus Services, which is hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. That's 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. Our last caller brought up a point about the politicization, maybe added an extra syllable in there, of military. I had a friend, he was at Fort Hood the day the shooting took place there. And he had left the Army in the late 1990s, well, actually, early part of 2000s, and gone to school and gotten a degree and a master's degree in education and wanted to become a school teacher. And then he got thrown out of his college because he wrote in a paper that he... what did he say? His name is Scott McConnell, and he's actually featured in one of Michelle Malkin's books. In fact, Michelle Malkin took him to dinner one night, and because his wife was working, he dragged me along, so I got to meet Michelle Malkin as well. But he got thrown out of college because he said in one of his papers that he believed in corporal punishment in schools. He thought that schools lacked that, and he talked about his belief in prayer and things like that. Even though he got an A on the paper, they threw him out of school. He fought a court case. He won the court case. They had to bite their tongues and give him his degree. And then he got a job teaching in North Carolina, and he said, I found out that schools were so politically correct, I couldn't stand it. He rejoined the Army. He went back in the Army. He was at Fort Hood the day the shooting took place there. Scott is now retired from the Army, living in Hawaii. And you know what he tells me? He said, frankly, he got so sick and tired of the political correctness. It mirrors, I have a couple of friends. One of them is the grandson of the great middleweight boxing champion Joey Giardello. And his grandson Joey was telling me one time he left the Marine Corps. He left the Marine Corps for the same reason. He and some of his friends just said they were sick and tired of all of these officers who were there basically as commissars and political officers and not there to lead troops and win wars. It's 9:25. Bill Colley with you this morning. 32 at our studios. We have a caller with us. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hi, Bill. My name is Charlie Tuma. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. What's on your mind?
Your caller, two things. One, Dresden. Dresden was a railroad shipping yard about 40 kilometers from Berlin, and it was taken out at the specific request of Joseph Stalin. Although it's true, it was a small town and had a lot of historical value, but that's why that all came about. And then Winston Churchill later thought maybe they had gone a little bit overboard because they really did level the whole town.
Yeah, and in fact, when I was reading the book, the Max Hastings book, he makes a point of mentioning the rail yard there, although that ended up being pretty much untouched.
That's true.
After the bombing.
That's true. Now, the second point I have to make, I got a lot of gray hairs, and we get the language all messed up. But we do not have a volunteer army anymore. It's a professional army, and the volunteer army existed when people in this country were willing to let themselves be drafted as they were needed by the government. And that's not what we have today. We have a professional mercenary army, and that's just a fact. And I agree with everything you have to say, except that this call to arms will not work with the current generation. Those days are gone. If you rely on that, you're going to be the only lieutenant going across the desert all by yourself, and just no one's going to show up anymore. So we're just going to have to bite the bullet, pay whatever it costs to hire these people, and then do as you propose.
Well,
but this call to arms is not going to fly because, as I just mentioned, we do not have a volunteer army anymore. We have a mercenary army.
Well, thank you for the...
We've gone down the same road that Carthage went down, the same road that Rome went down. In the long haul, this is probably not going to work out. But for right now, we're just going to have to pay the bill. And other than that, I agree with everything you say. You're just going to have to kill them all.
Yeah.
And the sooner we get to that point, the quicker this will all end. And that's about all I have to say.
Well, I thank you very much for your call, sir. And he brings up a great point. Will young people in this country who, they're mainly libertarian any longer, they're very self-absorbed, they don't see any reason for, to join clubs or be charitable or put on a uniform and serve their country any longer. It's give me, what can I get in many cases. He may well have a point there that we may be done for. You're up next, and you're on the air on newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley.
Yes, the main problem with our fearless leader, Barack Obama, is he described himself the other day. He used an analogy, which was ridiculous, described himself as a mayor who's keeping down crime. And he could just describe himself as what he's supposed to be, which is a world leader who is prosecuting a war. Because there's a huge difference between crime and war. Because a mayor dealing with crime is dealing with our constitutional government internally, and a war is external threats, and those people don't have the constitutional rights. And all they do is, it's like when Bill Clinton said that the Saudis had Osama bin Laden, but he didn't have anything to bring him in on. He was prosecuting a war, and he's there acting as if he needs a warrant with Miranda rights.
Yeah, I thank you for the call. Can you imagine that, stopping to Mirandize every terrorist you met on the battlefield? Since the caller referenced President Obama's outlook on all of this, just very quickly, his deputy, that is Eric Holder, his chief law enforcer, said yesterday that we are not in a state of war. He disputed what Secretary of State John Kerry had said a few months ago. More on this coming up in just a few minutes. Some of us actually have it's not a day of obligation in the Roman Catholic Church, but we still feel obligated. Today is called Ash Wednesday. Some of you may have heard of it. I'm trying to get out of here early today so I can make a church service a little afternoon for that reason. I just there are other opportunities later in the evening, but I'm generally off to La La Land about 7:30 at night, so I get up early to prepare for the program, very, very early, in fact. But I had to note this the other day. There was apparently a newspaper story, and I referred to it as the drive-by church. But there is a church. It's not of my denomination, but it is doing ashes on the go. So I guess you just show up if you're in a hurry, and maybe there's a drive-through window, or they open up one of the stained glass windows, hand you a bag of ashes. Take care now. God bless you. And you can go off and maybe apply the ashes on your own. But don't do it while you're driving, because annoying enough to see women sometimes putting on their makeup and talking on cell phones. Well, men do that too, the latter one. But you shouldn't be doing that. And I thought about that for a minute, and I know that, and I wrote a piece about this the other day. That's also at our Facebook page, News Radio 1310 KLIX. Called the Drive-By Church. And I wrote about this, and I realized that Jesus went out and he dined with tax collectors and did things that some people said, is that really what you should be doing? So you got to go where people are. And some churches are doing services in bars on Sundays. I know that, and I'm a huge fan of tent revivals. I was working at a TV station in the late 1990s, and there was a tent revival going on. I lived about 2 miles from work. And there was an old grocery store parking lot, and it was being used for a tent revival one summer, and it was filled every night. Of course, it was very hot. People were looking for a little cooling under the tent, I suppose. But hey, it worked. And I think those things are wonderful. You don't always need bricks and mortars to reach people with the gospel. But we do have buildings now. And there's a history in my faith. At one time, that had to be practiced out in the forest, and they used rocks for altars because the Cromwellians might come along and slit their nostrils if they saw them actually practicing their faith. That's gone, at least for the time being. ISIS is not here yet, forcing us into submission. But we have these beautiful edifices, and we have these beautiful buildings. And if you think it's important enough, then go to church and go there and get the ashes instead of doing this drive-through scenario. It really is about your personal commitment, is it not? And doesn't your personal commitment suffer if you have to just run by, thanks for the ashes, and then run down the street, smearing them on your forehead? I was telling Benito earlier today that sometimes when we were young and we weren't as committed, perhaps, as youngsters to certain things about faith, there was a trick guys would use. They would take a plate and they would take a Bic lighter. Zippo would pretty much run its course by then, and I think Ronson was long gone, but they would take a Bic lighter and they would hold that lighter beneath the plate, and you know what happens? There's a creosote buildup on the bottom of that plate, and then they would smear that on their foreheads. And that's how they could claim that they had actually gone to church that particular day. But someone knew, well, a being knew of great power, and those are things to keep in mind. But this whole notion that, we're going to make it, the church is like a convenience store. Come pick up your ashes. Here's a bag. Go ahead. See you later. Bye-bye. I don't understand that. And I think it's, but there you go again. We talked with a caller a few minutes ago about young people any longer, and young people don't have a commitment. They don't have the time. They don't believe. They're too busy with their video games and all of their interfacing with that. And they feel that somehow they don't need all of this community, and that they're on their own. They're a nation of one. That is the ultimate, I guess, criticism of libertarians. And I'm a strong believer in a lot of what they talk about. The Constitution, bedrock of, I think, our country, and we have to adhere to it very, very strictly. But that doesn't mean that in your personal life. Ron Paul gave a speech a few years ago where he was talking to some young libertarians, and he said, yeah, this is my creed. This is what I believe in. He said, however, I also believe in personal responsibility. Don't go around killing babies in your wombs. Don't go around, dropping drugs down your throat every day. Be a good citizen. Help your neighbor out. These are important things. This is part of America. And I think to a great extent, a lot of the younger set don't seem to understand that part of it, that there's a covenant there. And you cannot have 330 million independent countries living within our border. And it seems we're off in that direction. 9:38, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're up next. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Good morning, Bill. You're talking about this generation. We call them the Generation Zero. We had the Generation X, and now we have the Generation Zero. I don't see your association with the Libertarian Party, though.
Well, as far as the party, I was once actually registered as a libertarian.
I see.
But I voted mainly for Republican Party candidates because there weren't many libertarians around to vote for.
Well, years ago, I used to think of the libertarians as people that don't believe in government at all. In other words, take down the stop signs, don't enforce any traffic laws, don't do anything that's government related.
That's anarchy, right?
And I thought that was typical libertarian, and that's why I've never been a libertarian.
Hey, I've got to let you run. Thank you for the call. I think a lot of people look at that, but some of these young libertarians are anarchists. There's no other way around it. Happened to say something last night. You talk about the younger generation, and maybe they need to pay a bit more attention to the world around them. There was a story I read just before I went to bed last night, and it detailed what's going to be happening with these people who decided to forego health insurance in calendar year 2014. Now, the penalty in Obamacare for doing that is not necessarily crushing for a lot of people, but still, a lot of these people are going to be shocked when they start finding out that they do have a penalty coming, and when they're doing their taxes, and it's not going to go over well, I'm sure, with a lot of them who, what do you mean? I thought it was going to be free. When that happened, when Obamacare was first launched, so many of these people who had backed it and beat the drum and made so much noise about it, they were floored when they went on the computer, which is where most of them were directed to go to enroll. That's the other thing. There are people out there who do not have computers in this country, and we tend to talk about people who've been left off the bandwagon. No one makes any effort to really reach them anymore. But all of these people who thought that it was going to be free, because they think that, apparently everything is free, and that you don't have to actually pay for programs or people who are administering programs, they ended up going online, and they were shocked to find out, wait a minute, I got a premium here? What's a premium? Oh, it's a bill. That's what it is. It means you got to pay someone. They were stunned, and all of a sudden they just suddenly said, nope, not for me. And they turn that computer off. Well, all right. So the government says, well, we have a penalty if they did that. Now they're going to find out that they're going to pay some money anyway. But they didn't know that. I happened to be in Washington the March weekend when Obamacare passed. Let me tell you something about how nasty that situation was. Michelle Bachmann had come out on a Wednesday and had called for and she has since left the House of Representatives. Really, she was America's Margaret Thatcher. She came out on a Wednesday, and she made a call for people to come to Washington and demonstrate. And you know what? 30,000 people showed up that weekend, and there was a huge rally that took place outside the Capitol building. Well, I was working that morning. I had to work Saturday morning, and I got a call from an old girlfriend, and she said, "Hey, I'm over here at the rally." I lived about 2 hours away. She said, "Can you come over and pick me up?" Because she said, there's going to be, this is going to go on all night. She said, "I don't want to ride home on the bus with everyone else." So I jumped in the car. I drove across the Bay Bridge from the western side of the Chesapeake, got on the train into downtown Washington, and she met me along with another friend at the steps of the South Capitol train station. And so I went down to the Capitol with them. There were guards standing on the steps of the Capitol, and they were armed with rifles. I mean, really powerful rifles. And here you had people who were there pushing their babies around in baby carriages as part of the demonstration. Families, middle Americans, old people, babies, all mixed. And yet Nancy Pelosi, who at the time was running the House of Representatives, had demanded the guards be out there to intimidate the people. This is America, my friends. And you had these armed guards, and they were wearing vests, and what did she believe was going to happen? So we stood outside and mocked her with chants of "Nancy, nah," and occasionally someone would come and glower at us out of a window, and that was about the extent of it. We were unable, obviously, to bring a stop to it. And even the previous Tea Party rallies, and I was there at the big one in 2009, we must have had 1.5 million people out there on the lawn, and it still didn't change their minds. You've got a government that just refuses to acknowledge the majority any longer. And then they wonder why they did not win congressional elections in 2010 and 2014. And but for a better candidate for president in 2012, the outcome would have been far worse for the Democrats. And so maybe they're learning a very hard lesson here, but the people who actually were on board for this Obamacare thinking that it was actually socialized medicine and that all they had to do was show up and get everything for free, by golly, they've got a rude awakening coming up in the next few weeks. And you know what? I hate to say it, sweet justice. I look at it that way. It's 9:48. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Also 35. So we are going to warm up today. It was chilly again this morning as we got started. And we are going to see some return to winter with some light snow flurries coming up in a couple of days. But overall, the weather picture, it looks like we're going to get out of this season pretty well unscathed without any really great discomfort, if you will, with the weather. I've got Mike Huckabee coming up. I'd like to take a call right now, but I wouldn't be able to keep you on the air very long, so my apologies. Huckabee is one of those hardwired breaks that we have, and the Huckabee Report is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Reverend Governor Huckabee, by the way, is leading in the polls right now for the Iowa caucus. And mainstream media, they're losing bladder control because of this. Because they've tried to marginalize him, especially after the release of his recent book. Oh, he's anti-women. He thinks women should be having children instead of aborting them. And he thinks women shouldn't be dancing around dressed like streetwalkers on stage, singing songs to influence young girls. Oh, what a rotten human being he must be. And you know what? He's leading in the polls where the very first presidential caucus, will take place in less than a year. Amazing. And a thank you to Governor Huckabee for joining us again this morning. Just a couple of minutes left. We'll wrap things up in about 3 minutes, actually, closer to 3 minutes. Do want to point out Rush Limbaugh will be along following the news. The 10 o'clock news from Fox. Also, Sean Hannity following Fox News at 1 o'clock. Glenn Beck following Fox News at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And a couple of other just quick notes. We were talking about Obamacare and some of the rude surprises some people happen to be getting right now. This is from the Washington Examiner. Access to Obamacare isn't the same as access to health care. I love this. I was reading it and didn't get to it yesterday. Thought if I got a chance, if I found some related story, I'd be able to make a quick mention of it. It's 9:55, 36-hour temperature. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The writer says just because new enrollees have something that can be called health insurance, it doesn't mean they can rely on it when they want to see their preferred doctor or local hospital. The Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services made calls to Medicaid managed care providers who are actually listed as accepting Medicaid patients. Quote, "We found that slightly more than half of providers could not offer appointments to enrollees," unquote. Oops. The writer goes on to say obtaining private insurance through a government-run Obamacare exchange doesn't eliminate these access problems because Obamacare imposed a raft of regulations on insurance policies. Insurers were forced to respond in several ways to cover the increased costs. One way was to hike premiums, a phenomenon that's been described as rate shock. But another way has been to slash the number of doctors and hospitals that are included in their coverage network. Such narrow network plans have already triggered a wave of lawsuits in California. There you go. So once again, Libby's, you got what you wanted. Now you got to live with it. 9:56. Bill Colley with you. And as I said, Rush Limbaugh coming up in just a few minutes. We haven't spent a lot of time on it. We brought it up yesterday briefly while Steve Millington was in studio with us. If you go to our website, newsradio1310.com, you're going to check out a story there about taxation and some proposals to change the sales tax structure in the state of Idaho. If we get an opportunity, perhaps tomorrow or Friday, I'd like to talk about that because one of the provisions would be to eliminate the sales tax on groceries, which might be considered one of the most regressive taxes in all of America. And there was some discussion about that yesterday. In what direction will there be a graduated sales tax? And we also had a discussion briefly, too, as well, during the course of that conversation with Steve yesterday about dropping the income tax altogether for just a large, as Senator Crapo put it during one of his town hall meetings in Twin Falls the other day, in favor of something called a consumption tax, which is just the fair tax. And you would eliminate all of these other taxes potentially if you were to do that. And that is not considered a regressive tax because in that particular case, you can choose whether you want to buy something or not. So therefore, if you chose to consume less, you would be paying fewer taxes. Not a bad idea. We get an opportunity, we may bring in some experts on all of these too as well. Automated payment tax, flat tax, fair tax. Might devote a whole week to a series on that as we're approaching tax day. In the meantime, God willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow between 8 and 10 o'clock, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Top Story. My name is Bill Colley.